This podcast is brought to you thanks to the generous support of Whistler Blackcomb, leaders in delivering adventure.
Like, who knew that the water level at Niagara Falls can fluctuate up to a meter? And if you're the little ice climber on the side of Niagara Falls and the water goes up a meter, you get taken out. So then how do you deal with that? Like, well, yeah, we can call the power companies. I had one person's job whose only function was to monitor the dam releases that affect the water levels going over Niagara Falls. And I had about 15 minutes from that warning to get out.
This is Delivering Adventure. Welcome to the podcast that explores what it really takes to share adventure like a pro, with your friends, your family, and as a profession. My name is Chris Capio, and I'm coming to you from Whistler, British Columbia.
And I'm Jordy Shepard, recording from Canmore, Alberta. After a lifetime of working extensively in different parts of the adventure guiding industry, Chris and I have teamed up to launch this podcast. In each episode, you will hear top adventure guides, managers, marketers, and athletes share their best stories, advice, and trade secrets. The goal of this podcast is to share how you can take yourself and others farther from the mountains to the office and beyond.
In this episode, we are joined by Will Gadd. Will is an ACMG Alpine guide, sponsored athlete with Red Bull. He has ice climbed Niagara Falls and Helmcken Falls, the last glacier on Mt Kilamjaro, as well as icebergs and many other places. In this episode, we ask Will how he manages to avoid crossing the line between adventure and misadventure. We're going to ask him to explain what ice climbing is, why people should do it, and then we're going to explore some of his philosophies around managing risk. Will has a lot to share, and this is another episode where we have decided to go with two parts to ensure that none of his best insights are lost. Now, Jordy, you know Will pretty well, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. We live in the same town, Canmore, Alberta, and we are fairly intertwined in everything we do. Including Will being a student of mine in the last few years in the Avalanche Search and Rescue program with the Canadian Avalanche Association, which was great to have him participating in that. And he's very, very prolific, very intense personality who likes getting stuff done at a high level. We also have Sarah, Will's partner, who's an accomplished guide and climber. She'll be featured on an episode later this season. Will is a multi-sport athlete at an incredibly high level. He's set world records in paragliding, competed internationally in sport and ice climbing, and climbed ice and mixed routes at a world-class level for quite a long time. And actually, that's one of the big things, is Will has been doing this for a long time at a very high sustained level.
Great. Well, let's bring Will into the DA studio.
Hi, Will. Thanks for joining us.
That's a lot of territory. I like it.
Thanks for coming on the show. Where are you right now?
I'm in Canmore, Alberta, so as you noted, just across the valley from you, and you've got a thunderstorm brewing on your side, so heads up, it may get adventurous over there shortly. And I guess Chris is in Whistler, so we've covered Western Canada here, and good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, again, thanks for coming on the show. We know you're a busy individual all over the place.
We all are. Nobody ever said making a living in the outdoor industry was simple, right? We're all hustling all the time. That's probably the basis for it. Absolutely. How do you make it work?
So tell us about your earliest memory of experiencing adventure. We'd like to hear about that.
Probably with my dad. When I was a little kid, we lived in Calgary, and we would go into the mountains every weekend. And usually there would be adventure, whether I was up for that or not. There was going to be adventure. So it was sort of involuntary adventure. And I thought that was normal. I thought all kids were dragged into the mountains every weekend. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized this was somewhere between awesome and borderline child abuse. And I remember being out there with my dad and how he approached the mountains. And I don't think I've really realized how much that shaped me until I was older. He had a very surprisingly humble attitude toward being out in the mountains, and I've tried to operate with that. I've done some things in life, but I do try to emulate that attitude of I'm really small. This is a really complicated place, and no matter how much I know, I actually know only a very thin sliver of what's going on out there. And that's why my dad, succeeded, and he's still around, I think, is he went into the mountains with that attitude, not of domination, but it's like, with careful coexistence, we'll get out of this today. It's like dancing with grizzly bears. You don't want to make any sudden moves. And, that rubbed off on me. So those were my earliest memories of adventure and looking at risk. And then just how awesome it was to be out there I remember being 8 years old and jumping over a crevasse on the way up Mount Athabasca and thinking, wow, that's really deep. I definitely don't want to go down there. And that's why we're using the rope, I guess. And then being on the summit as a little kid, like I was 8 on top of Mount Athabasca. That is not something I do with my own kids today, but it was reasonable for him. And that was just my life growing up. I really didn't, people sometimes get into adventure later and they're like, how does that work? But I think we're all having adventures all the time. And also have the adventures as a kid in like Bowness Park. We found a dead person. That was, like that kind of stuff is full on, right? As a little kid. And we're all having adventures. It isn't like life is adventures. The rest of it that kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's amazing. We're seeing a theme here that for folks talking about experiencing adventure and where it came from, a lot of it does come from your parents, right? And so, we're hopefully going to keep fostering that social need to pass on adventure. But as people are more and more city based, I think there is a chance of losing that connectivity. So that's where us as guides and professionals in the industry, we have that opportunity to introduce people to that if they aren't getting it elsewhere. And if they are getting it elsewhere, like say from their parents or whatever, hopefully they have some better tools in their toolbox to deliver adventure to their kids. So that brings us on to what was your earliest memory of delivering adventure, where you were actually the one not just experiencing it, but delivering it?
Oh, wow. Well, this is not a great story, but it'll be, yeah, you're going to laugh. You may not look at me the same way, but so I got this summer job working for the Boys and Girls Club of Canada, right? And I was living in Jasper. My parents had moved up there. I was 15 and I was given 10 kids between the ages of like 8 and 12, which when you're 15 isn't really a lot younger than you. And I was like, I was told to do something with them. That was my job description, do something. And they were older people, but they were involved in other things. And so I'm running these kids. And so I was like, what am I going to do with them? And so we went hiking and built fires and threw axes. And, I'm 15 and I worked at that job for a couple of years. I'm 15 or 16 and I've got all these kids I'm responsible for, and I'm a kid. And often I had an adult leader along, but often I didn't. And it was magic. It was wonderful taking people out. I took them climbing, and I used some tactics for that I wouldn't use today. Like we were belaying. Back then, everybody's on a hip belay. And so my system at the time was atrocious, but it was effective. I'd have one kid belaying on a hip belay, and the other kid's job was to hit him if he took his brake hand off the rope. And it worked really well. They never took the brake hand off the rope. Yeah, you can't do that. But I was like 15 boy, it's like, this is the solution and it's working. There's no issues here. But anyhow, I did learn a lot more. And some of the mentors in that group, when they were coming out with me, I learned some really important things about just being outside and being comfortable teaching people things and learning that my, many things like my brake hand system was really probably not the way forward as an educator. But I was, I think that's one thing. It's just a repeated story of my career is every 10 years, I realized how little I actually knew 10 years earlier. And maybe, but if you live to 1,000, maybe you'd know enough to really feel like you know what you're doing. But yeah, it's continual learning always. But yeah, I didn't mess those kids up too badly. We had a great time. I only lost Joey once. Joey went sideways and I had to go find Joey. But in general, it was great. And I loved it. And that's still what I'm doing today is taking people out into the mountains and, not only as a guide, but also as a paragliding teacher. And I taught whitewater kayaking and a bunch of different stuff. I love doing it. It's great.
Yeah. And also you're delivering adventure through your experiences that you get and you get to experience as a professional athlete and a sponsored athlete too, which we'll talk more about later here. So now we want to focus a little bit here on ice climbing. It's a bit of a foreign thing to a lot of people.
Don't do it. That's my best advice for ice climbing.
That's some good advice.
It's a lot of fun. It's magic.
And yeah, we feel our listeners would be quite interested to kind of get a basic overview of what ice climbing is, what it's like from your perspective as an expert in the field.
Well, I must be reaching that age where I'm an expert in the field. I guess everybody goes through that. But no, I mean, I've learned a lot about ice climbing, and I've done a lot of it. But again, every year, especially when I'm teaching, I learn something new. And that's what's cool about it. I spend a lot of days out there teaching people how to ice climb. And for those who maybe aren't clued into the ice climbing world, it's practically our second winter national sport in Canada after ice hockey or something. But you go out and you climb frozen waterfalls, and it's ridiculous and awesome, and it's beautiful. The substance that you curse when you're driving or walking around in the city, you can walk up to a frozen waterfall and climb it, and that magic still fires me up, and I like to share it with people because it fires them up. And if you're outside with fired up people, then life's usually pretty good in my experience. So yeah, I spent a lot of time teaching ice climbing, guiding ice climbing, sort of the same really. And then I write about it. So I've written a book about it. I'm rewriting my ice climbing book, and try also in my social media to make at least some of my social media useful rather than just I sent it and it was sick, to quote our earlier conversation. I do some of that too. I do like sending it. It is sick. It's fun. But try to give a little bit more perspective on maybe some things people could be thinking about. And that's why I'm here today with you, is I am really interested in how people think about adventure in the outdoors, and trying to give people a few tools anyhow that I wish I'd known when I was younger.
So you're on an ice climb right now. What talk us through that tactile visual experience?
Well, in ice climbing, you basically get to turn into a human grizzly bear. You've got giant claws in your hands that you can swing into the ice, and you've got claws in your feet that you can kick in, and you can climb this frozen, kind of mysterious substance that, is dangerous. And ice climbing is not safe. It's a larger than daily life risk, but it sure is fun. And you get to smash up all this crystal. And I'm not going to make the noises here for fear I'll blow your ears out, but that's the best part of it, is you're swinging your ice tools into the ice and things are breaking, and it's just interesting and unusual. And no matter how many times I do it, it still blows me away that it works. It's like this form of magic where you walk up and you can climb a frozen waterfall. It's completely unbelievable, yet it works. And it's not that hard. Anybody can do it. I've taken people in their 80s ice climbing, and took my kids when they were, 5 or 6 years old. So it's a lifelong sport, as all these sports are. That's what's cool about them. I'm 55. I'm still climbing a lot and pretty stoked on it. And you can do these sports as opposed to you need a football team to play football, but you can go to the mountains and go climbing. So ice climbing, sounds of crystal breaking, claws on your hands and feet, medieval weaponry. It's great. Everybody should not do it. I mean, it's a ridiculous sport, but it's so cool.
And it's got a lot of similarities to rock climbing and alpinism, but it also has a lot of differences too, right? You have this blank slate in front of you, on the lesser technical climbs, right? Where, the more technical climbs, maybe there's only one way to go and one way to do it for ice climbing, but, and the steeper it gets. But on the less technical climbs, you can kind of go anywhere and just choose your own adventure too. And you can put in protection anywhere on a fat ice bulge. It's pretty freeing at the same time. And we used to climb a lot with leashes, and we would feel overly connected to our tools, and like you didn't want to put in pro because it would be this huge effort to try and deal with your leashes and tools. And there's all kinds of different clippy ways to get out of them, or using your teeth to pull on the leashes or whatever, popping your, dentist loved it, doing damage to your teeth kind of thing. But I've always found it's interesting at how it's a burly sport, but it also is very freeing, because when you're rock climbing, you have to pretty much use the hold that exists there to a certain extent. Maybe there's multiple holds and multiple ways to climb it, but in ice climbing, you can be pretty artistic with it, the way you ascend.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the movement's really beautiful too. I do a lot of rock climbing. I used to compete for Canada in sport climbing comps, and I can rock climb okay, but the ice climbing and movement, when you're doing it well, is really beautiful. It is more like skiing or dancing or something. It's a flow sport, a little bit more sometimes than rock climbing is. You're moving you can move quickly and with security, and it's just fun. So yeah, everything you said, yes, I'm in. I like it. I mean, it's a bad idea, that, but it is very different than rock climbing in that the hazards are sometimes less obvious. For sure, an ice climb is going to fall down every year for starters. So you do have to kind of approach it with that attitude of this is not a permanent medium. And rock climbs, generally, when I go back to them year in, year out, there's more chalk, there's another bolt, part fell off, whatever, but it's the same rig usually. Whereas ice climbing, it often really isn't. They form completely differently. They're the pillars form differently, the ice forms differently.
Sometimes thin, sometimes thick, sometimes we go for a decade without a root even forming, and then it's back in a particular year.
Well, and what you just said is interesting, because that led to what I've been really involved in the last 20 years is some of these routes that were like, we waited decades for them to form and they never did. Finally, we're like, aha, we'll climb the rock with our ice tools and winter to get to that icicle. And all of a sudden you have this new sport called mixed climbing, where you get to climb on rock and use that gymnastic movement and then swing around on this icicle in space. And that fired me up, and I pursued that really heavily for 20 years basically of my life, because it was so much fun, and still fired up to do it, just a little bit differently now. But yeah, ice climbing's different. They're less, I kind of look at any outdoor sport and I rank the risk and so on from sort of complexity, least complex to most complex, and consequence from lowest to highest. And that's kind of my scale for judging what I'm doing. Is it really complicated, or is it really simple? Like a climbing gym's as simple as it gets. And ice climb's about halfway along the complexity and consequence scale. And then you get to like, skiing 60 plus degree lines in the Himalaya at night, whatever your like most complicated out there thing is that you could think of. And ice climbing is about halfway along that line of complexity. And you can make it more complex. You start ice climbing in avalanche terrain, and then you have to make judgments about snow. You can reduce the complexity by going to little gorges that don't have avalanche hazard and aren't very high. And, people tend not to die in those low complexity, low consequence environments. But as things get more complex and you add variables, and I think that's what my dad was really good at, going back to the opening statement, is he was very good at using terrain when we were on skis and knowing what he didn't know when we were moving into new sports or new environments, to keep the complexity and consequences, most of the time, Athabasca accepted, relatively low.
Yeah, just keeping it kind of the baby steps to start and get that base, and in the lesser terrain, which is still doing the activity, and then working your way up to the more complex.
Yeah, this subject is really interesting to me, because I do look back at my early career and sometimes last week, and I'm like, what was I thinking? And so you do go through that, but I think that is helpful to people, is to recognize. When I started climbing, it was all climbing. It didn't matter whether it was ice climbing, rock climbing, alpine climbing, it was all climbing. And as I've gotten older, you can choose where you want to be, and also recognize that, personally, maybe I don't have the competence to make, I wouldn't feel competent at all making heli ski decisions. Backcountry skiing, I can be like, yeah, this is for me. I'm comfortable with the terrain limitation that I put in, but I'm not going to make those really fine judgments for groups of people in snow. For instance, because I know I'm not like you or many of my other guiding friends who have that background, and I'm willing to step it down. But understanding where you are in that complexity and how much you actually know is to me pretty much essential. It's like, that's whenever I'm low competence in something, I'm like, yeah, it's not so good. And I operate in those environments a lot, unfortunately, and I tend to try and. I don't have to try. Actually, it comes pretty naturally, because I've had my ass kicked so many times. I get humble pretty quick. I'm like, well, I'm probably not actually that good at this. So we're going underneath the Greenland ice sheet today, and I don't know shit about this. So we're going to figure it out.
Make it up as you go.
It's who does though? That's for me where it gets interesting, is to how do you manage these more complicated environments, and especially when you don't know very much about them. It's both really interesting and really hard.
So let's go to one of the more famous places in Canada, Niagara Falls. It's pretty well known, but not known for being climbed. Like, there's been people go over it in barrels, etc., using gravity. But how about the going up it part? Like from your perspective, was that complex? Was with good planning, was it actually relatively safe? What, was it good for the media side of things? How did that go?
Well, the media side of things was great. Killed it there. There, and I also learned a lot. That was one of the first times I've been working in these with a lot of different agencies. I was working with 2 different national park and state park organizations and all these levels of government bureaucracy, and they all didn't like what I was proposing, which was to climb Niagara Falls. I thought it was a great idea, and unfortunately nobody else did. So how do you figure out what the problems are and what their fears are? And I spent a lot of time just listening to people and understanding what their issues were and then addressing them. It's the same thing you do as a guide. If somebody's afraid, you ask what's going on, and you work it through. You don't just say, "Oh, this isn't a problem." It's like, you're afraid. Why? How can we fix this? So we had discussions, and it took an incredible amount of time. I think I went to Buffalo, about a dozen times. I went to Buffalo, New York, and met with every level of government before finally they were comfortable that I was a nutcase, but not one that was just out to go over the falls in a barrel. I actually had a plan. And I'd done this before, and I could show them some video and say, yes, I think I can do this because I've done things that are similar. And it took a long time to get organized. And then again, it's an unknown environment. Like, who knew that the water level at Niagara Falls can fluctuate up to 1 meter? And if you're the little ice climber on the side of Niagara Falls and the water goes up 1 meter, you get taken out. So then how do you deal with that? Like, here's a problem. Can we do anything about it? Well, yeah, we can call the power companies. I had one person's job whose only function was to monitor the dam releases that affect the water levels going over Niagara Falls. And I had about 15 minutes from that warning to get out. And there's schedules and stuff, but they don't always follow those schedules. So again, all these different problems and trying to figure out what would happen if the water levels changed. Could I get the crew out of there fast enough or not? And if how are we going to do that? Do we need fixed lines to move them out of the way? How about my camera person on the edge? And it was just this incredible layering of logistical nightmares. And the ice climbing was honestly the relatively easy part. Like, I know how to do that. I've done it a lot. But like, how do you deal with 5 different helicopter operations that all want to rescue you? You get an air traffic controller. This is just, and all these different problems, and a lot of it was working with the state police. They don't work on ice. And so I spent some days working with them to give them training on how to move on ice so they can go and get people off the ice when they go over the falls. And yeah, there's a lot of bad things that happen there. So it was basically a 2-year project to climb for 3 hours, and it was worth it. And it was very cool, but it was an unknown environment. There's the old Donald Rumsfeld quote, which I'm probably going to not do very good justice, but I think about it a lot. There's the things we know, the things we know we don't know, and then the things that we don't know that we don't know. And I first heard that quote, and I'm like, that man is an idiot. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that's one of the smartest things I've ever heard, because it's the things that we don't know that are the problem that tend to get us. We're like, it's this way. And it's like, oh, we haven't thought about that. So I spent a lot of time thinking really negatively. And I jokingly call this the positive power of negative thinking. But it saved the life of myself and the people that I'm working with a lot. It's like, what can we go wrong, and can we deal with that outcome? Or, what can go wrong, and can we deal with that or not? And just because we've recognized the problem doesn't mean we've done anything about it. Maybe it's still a really bad idea. I fail at least 50% of the time when I'm working on film projects in terms of my goal. We fail a lot, but my main goal is always to survive. And that puts the other goals in order, right? I walk out the door and I'd like to be, back in the bar by 6 is a pretty hard rule for me. That's my main risk management strategy. Is this stupid? Will it get me back in the bar by 6 or not? Or will it have an impact? And if it does, then we modify. But positive power, negative thinking. Niagara Falls is super complicated, but that's what makes it interesting. If we're easy, like, what's the point?
I think if more people going out and doing these types of activities, whether it's recreationally or with a guide or as a guide, if you fast forward before you're in the environment and kind of faced with those decisions, if you fast forward to the point where the bad thing has happened, make that happen in your mind. It really will prepare you for if the bad thing happens, or it might actually make dissuade you from doing that activity or doing exactly that activity or going that far, because you fast forwarded to, oh, the bad thing has happened and I don't want to even be involved with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And that's a tool I use when teaching a fair amount. It's like, well, we don't think this is going to happen, but if it did, and we're all sitting around, would we think we made good decisions that day or not? And it's a pretty helpful tool to analyze what you're doing. And my threshold has changed a lot. When I was younger, 99% seemed like a really good ratio. Like if somebody told you had 99% chance of, hucking yourself across the canyon and making it, most people would go, yeah. But the thing is, we're out there like, maybe not, I'd be like, yeah, dude, fire it up. But and for those people who are listening and not watching, I can see their faces, and there's some disagreement here. We're laughing. Anyhow, the 99% seem pretty good. But the thing is, if you're a professional, or even if you want to do this your whole life as a for your own personal stoke, and you're going to do it 1,000 days, if it's 99% a sure thing, you die 10 times. So 99% is not even that good. It's actually a pretty bad number that assures you're going to have 10 outcomes. And that's assuming that you guess the probability right. And what I've seen with myself and others is most of us are pretty good at understanding the consequences of something happening, but we're not very good at understanding the probability. So I tend to define what I'm doing a lot more by consequences, like the bad thing is this. Am I comfortable with it? Is it 1 in 10,000? Like, am I any good at making that decision about how likely it is? Or do I really need to just go ski trees with my kids because I don't know about this. Like, it seems solid. My pit was good, but I got my kids and I can't handle that consequence. So we're going to go over here or whatever it is. So that's a long answer, but or a long point, I guess. But hopefully does that make sense to you, or is that?
Yeah. We are talking about the line between adventure and misadventure. So that totally rings true here, right? So if you don't know where that line is, because even though you're an expert, maybe, but you're still not comfortable saying you're 100% certain, then back off from it, well back, and then you'll have a good day.
Or just reduce the consequences. I spend a lot of my time out there trying to reduce the consequences, both in my own adventures and when I'm leading film teams or guiding. It's like, I can handle, if it's an adult, I can handle some things and others I just can't. And so if it's going toward that level of consequences, then I tend to back it down early. And, one of the tools I use to prepare guests that I take out is I send them a letter saying, I'm really, pretty experienced with this. I've done it a lot and I want to come back at the end of the day, but I screw up. That's the reality. And how we're going to work together is, I want you to be involved in this discussion. And if you see me doing something Western, like, speak up. That's great. I'm never upset when somebody says, did you mean to tie your knot like that? Because no, I didn't. You just saved my life. This is great. We're working together. This is awesome. And that is also, they engage more and they ask questions more. And there is the expectation of error. And I think when I was younger, I had the expectation of success. And now I really don't. I have the expectation that I will make mistakes, and if we work together, we'll do better. So I think that starts even before you go out the door, is recognizing your own fallibility and engaging the people you're supposed to be delivering adventure to in that process.
Are you ever nervous when you're, let's get back to being in front of the camera here, side of things. Are you ever nervous, and also not when the camera's rolling, but just, when you're with your clients or friends out there, like, yeah, or are you pretty much stone cold as ice? And
I have no fear. I'm the Ubermensch. No, that's total bullshit. I'm afraid a lot. That fear to me is really important. If I'm afraid out there, I don't feel good. And again, my baseline assumption is like, I'm going into a really hazardous place and I'm going to be like heads up out there. And yeah, I'm good at it. I've done it a lot. Okay. But my basic assumption is that there are things going on that I don't understand, and my job is to discover them. That's like a really big part of my job, maybe even more important than the quality of day I give my guests, is like, I have to be switched on and listening to that environment. And if I start to feel afraid, then usually that's because I'm missing something, right? I haven't clued into something, and I'm getting nervous. Maybe my brain has noticed that there's some snowballs over there, but my conscious mind hasn't gone, gee, that's a really big slope, but we're actually exposed, even though we're 50 meters up the hillside or whatever, and so that fear, when I feel it, is a clue to focus in and ask questions. And if somebody in my group says I'm uncomfortable, then yeah, I'm going to listen to that really fast and be like, okay, what's going on? What are you thinking? And I encourage people to speak up, whether they're on the teams that I'm leading for film projects or in my guiding groups. I really encourage them to speak up, and it goes back to that letter, but it goes into our time out there. I want to talk about it. Maybe they've noticed, if nothing else, it's a good opportunity. If they say, why are we here? Well, that's an excellent question. Let's talk about it. Or I'm not, I feel like we might not get back at the bar by 6. We're blowing it. I'm like, they might be, in fact, they often are right. And I'm just so fired up. I'm like, I'm going to get you to the summit. It's going to be rad, and they have a point. So, I think listening to that fear is super important, and then addressing it. Usually that which we avoid gets bigger and nastier. And if we do that long enough in the mountains, then it tends to get us. If we're like, it's all good, then it's probably not. So I think listening to that fear and addressing it, whether it's in yourself or others, is really, really important. If I'm afraid, I'm kind of doing something wrong.
Right. Yep. And then you should probably be throttling back from there.
Yeah. And sometimes it just means stopping, and having a look around. It's like, well, yeah, this is okay, but, maybe let's pay more attention to this, or, and then when I'm climbing, for example, if my fear levels start spiking, it's probably a bad sign. I should be worried, concerned, and every stick I'm like, is it good? Every time I swing my ice tool into the ice, even after doing it for 40 years now, I'm still like, is that good? And if it's not, then I swing again. And people will sometimes heckle me. They're like, you swung 8 times. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm going to swing 4 more. I don't care. I'm not dying today. And this is how I'm going to do it. And occasionally I still get it wrong. And what I'm doing is not safe. And I think it's important also to go out the door with no illusions about that. If we go out the door with the attitude of, again, this place is trying to kill us and we've got to do some things right or we're not coming back, then we'll set ourselves up for safety. But if we go out and we're like, it's all good, dude, send it, then we're going to get killed sooner. And that would suck because this is pretty fun.
In terms of ice climbing, talk to us about your thoughts on falling in the ice environment, the pure ice environment.
Yeah, I've been ice climbing now. I've been leading ice for almost 40 years. That sounds like a very long time, and it is, I guess. And although I will fall off one day ice climbing, I've yet to fall off on pure ice onto an ice screw. And it will happen. But again, it's that attitude of today, I'm going to try and not have that happen. So I'll swing as many times as I need to get a good placement, and I will be careful with my feet, and I will, assume that I can make that error. Because if you fall off ice climbing, you tend to break your leg about half the time, or some other part that you might want, head, neck, whatever. People break stuff about half the time they fall off ice climbing. And that can be fatal. A broken ankle is no big thing when you're sport climbing in the summer, but you break your leg at 4:00 in the winter, you're not getting rescued until the next day. So that could be a fatal injury, just something really basic. And setting your parameters around that is pretty important. I try to get good sticks and not fall off. But it's not just ice climbing. I try to do that with most things that I'm doing, especially when I'm taking care of other people. My bar's significantly lower when I'm taking care of other people than it is on my own. Although they're getting closer and closer as I get older. They're not as different as they used to be.
The gap tends to narrow. What goes into preparing for difficult climbs? What are your processes, thoughts, preparation?
A lot of times I don't know that I'm going into a difficult climb. I'm always like, this is going to be great. And then I get here and I'm like, oh no, it's in avalanche terrain and the snowpack's not that great. And there isn't as much ice as I thought there was going to be. And part of it's wet. And the temperature's supposed to go up. And does this even still make sense? It's unfortunately, because a lot of the times what I'm doing for difficult stuff is I'm on shoots or something and I fly in someplace and we get out of the machine and we're like, what do we do now? Or, it's an unknown thing. So we have to go back to that basic checklist of what are the consequences? Can we mitigate them? What do we think's going on here? Are we okay with those odds? Do we know enough to even set the odds and break it down? Some really basic things when I'm climbing locally, key bits of information are like, what's the avalanche forecast? So, I look at that, and there's pro versions of that and public versions of it, and I look at both every day, starting with the first snowflake anywhere, and I track it all winter long, because more ice climbers die in avalanches than they do from falling off. So, that's a big deal. Is my climb in avalanche terrain, and by that I mean, is there enough snow to avalanche? That's the bar I use. And if so, do I want to go there? Is this a reasonable thing? What's the forecast? What's happening? But and even with that, I can still get it wrong, but I do my best to make a good judgment, and then we go there and we manage all the other. I don't use the word risk management all that much anymore. I use the word risk engagement personally, because that's what we're going to do when we go out and do something in the mountains. We're going and we're going to engage with some risks. We're going to go wrestle grizzly bears, and how are we going to do that so that we favor the outcomes that we want? That's what I'm really interested in. So for ice climbing, avalanche forecast, and then some basic things. I'm still surprised in a lot of the sports I do that people often don't have comms. I've seen a few broken femurs, and I've never seen anybody who's like, yeah, I'm a purist. I'm an alpine purist. I don't want the helicopter. It's like, no, they want the helicopter right away. So do you have comms? Like, do you have an inReach? And do you know how to use it? And some basic things like that, and some basic first aid are parameters that go into that. And then you go out there and you do something really cool and beautiful and get home and dissect it. It's like, did we make good decisions today? Or did we just get away with it because we were lucky? And sometimes I've had a lot of good luck. Let's not pretend. Like, I've had some good luck when I needed it. I just like to not rely on that as much as I did when I was younger.
Yeah, I'll take good luck over good planning any day of the week, but you don't want to rely on it.
No, you have a lot more control over your planning and engagement. And again, if it's like someplace I've been 50 times that has no avalanche hazard, I'm willing to take some shortcuts. But if it's bigger terrain or something like that, then I start getting more and more engaged. As the consequences go up, my level of planning and engagement goes up a lot. And but you can never plan for everything. You still got to get out there and figure it out. And have fun. If you're not having fun, if you're just afraid and it's shitty, then go home.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't enjoy that. Never have, actually.
No, I agree.
Will, you've touched on a little bit talking about consequence and that sort of thing already, but how would you define what a misadventure is?
Well, you could probably define that anyway, but a misadventure to me would be something that's not going according to plan. So you have a plan. We all drop our route plans, or even if they're just, dude, what do you think? Yeah, we're good. Let's go. Right? Okay, we've made a route plan, even though we've made some kind of plan here. We get out there, and if things aren't going according to plan, that's okay. They usually don't, and I expect that. My expectation is that the plan's probably going to fall apart at some point during the day, and it's the rare day where I got home and it went perfectly to plan. Like, I don't know about you guys, but that's not normal. Normal is the plan doesn't work and you're into misadventure zone. I guess where it becomes either dangerous or really uncomfortable, or you do start relying on luck for outcomes, that's kind of where you're in the misadventure zone to me. When any of those three things happen, you've kind of lost the plot on the fun and good side of adventure, and those can be really meaningful and deep experiences. If you survive, it's pretty awesome. And you might have a misadventure. I have misadventures with my kids where we go out and it doesn't work, and it's like the bar is still pretty low. We didn't get done what we wanted to do, which is great. It's still kind of a misadventure, but until there's more hazard or higher consequences than you're comfortable with, you're still in the box. It's when the misadventure turns into like you're relying on luck. And that's kind of where it becomes not fun, or I don't want to play anymore, when it's like, this is not working. And then you should get home and analyze that. It's probably the biggest thing I see with people is both with those I coach, and then you read on Facebook, and it's always the same guy. Oh, I had another forced bivvy, and damn, it was a great adventure. It's like, if you're having forced bivvies and things are going sideways a lot, you need to look at that and figure out what's going on. There's usually, before people have accidents, it's usually like a series of, gee, I think this is great. We went out to climb that face, and there was tremendous rock fall, and we had to sit out there all night. But we lived because it's like, no, that was in my view, and I don't know if you can use profanity, but like, that was a serious fuck up. And so you should go home and like sit in the basement and drink a shitload of coffee until you can figure out why you sucked and how you're going to do it better next time, because you sucked. When that happens, when that misadventure comes to the point where you're coming close to either getting killed or only a little bit of luck separated you from that, it's like that reflection piece is really, really important to me. And I spend probably almost as much time thinking about what I did as what I'm going to do. I think that's really, especially when I was younger, I was like, wow, I survived, rad, onward. Now I'm like, God, I almost died, why? And then I want answers to that because it's important. So a lot of reflection, and if you have a misadventure, at the bare minimum, some reflection on why would be in order. I'm fired up on this stuff. I think about it a lot. So you're asking questions I care about. So thank you. I'm sorry if I'm going on.
No, well, we do too, and this is why we wanted to bring you in. Experience, it's only good if you can learn from it. And you often hear people, say that they have a lot of experience, but if they haven't learned, then essentially they've just done the same thing the same way over and over again, and they haven't gotten any better.
Yeah, that's really, really important. And that's, I think, in both athletics and guiding and my personal sports, whatever they are, it's like how I've gotten better. The practice is really important, but it's the reflection on how you practiced and what happened that often really takes it up a level. You can do something an awful lot and not learn very much about it. I've done that many times. It's that reflection where you learn, as you say, and go, right. And adventures are great. Just because it didn't go according to plan, that's not really a misadventure yet. It's more when you're like sitting there going, wow, how many toes am I going to lose? Now we're like solidly into the misadventure portion. It's like if you went up there to climb peak A and it sucks because there's rockfall or whatever, you go up peak B, like, okay, not exactly according to plan. You've had a little bit of misadventure, but that's normal. That's good. That's good management. It's just when things start to kind of get Western and you're going, this is not going the way I thought it should. What do I do to make it safe or safer? It's not safe, but safer, and why? Then you go home and you drink beer and you're like, wow. It's very seldom that I get back from a day of guiding or my personal sports or whatever, and I'm not like, I never think, wow, I nailed everything today. I'm like, missed 2 or 3 things today, and write them down and try to do better.
Do you have a specific example of a misadventure that you've had that you're willing to share with us and share some of the lessons that you learned from it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's usually a little bit of misadventure in every day where it's just like I didn't use the appropriate tactic for whatever I was doing, whether it's guiding, flying, whatever. A relatively recent one I had, I went climbing with my partner, Sarah, who is like super solid, and we go up to this sport climbing area, and the start's like, I don't know, it's 5'8", maybe 5'7", and she climbs 5'12", and she never falls off. She's locked on. She's like the human tick up there. I shouldn't compare my partner to a tick, but anyhow, you get the idea. She doesn't fall off, and we got this little ledge. It's pretty good sized ledge. Like if you just were to jump off, it'd be fine, and it's just kind of a rubbly 45-degree thing down for like another 20, 30 feet. It's no big thing. And if I were there like with somebody who's less competent, I might be like, it's sport climbing, but let's just stick clip this thing. But it's Sarah. She does not fall off. But I still give her a spot because the ledge is a little bit small, and she goes up and she falls off and she comes backwards at me. Her hand slipped, so she rotated over backwards. And this ledge I'm on is not that big, hey? Like all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I've actually screwed up pretty good here. And she's about to go rattling down this hillside, which is covered in boulders. Best case scenario, it's like bumps and bruises, but it could be a lot worse. And I gotta like stop her. And all it would have taken to prevent that was using the stick clip that was 30 feet away to the side. I'm a dumbass, but it's Sarah and it's easy and we're good and fuck that, we're going for it, man. Like what a jello head move thing to do. But it seemed reasonable at the time, and I could probably do it 100 more times and it would be fine. Okay, so I grab her out of the air and I fall down on the ledge, and I realize that I'm going over. I've screwed up. We're both going to go rattling down this. And we both sort of grab things and it all stops and everything's fine. But we've been much more enthusiastic about stick clips in any sort of environment since then. It's just a stupid little thing, right? Like, this is the easiest form of climbing out there. It's sport climbing. Nobody dies sport climbing. Very few people do anyhow. Low complexity, relatively low consequence. And I don't think we would have both died, but we certainly could have both gotten some pretty heavy injuries, right? It would have hurt a lot. So that's just one recent misadventure. And, that happens regularly enough. And I'm trying to change the culture a little bit. So I share my errors a lot more than when I was young, because I do think we need to start talking and sharing about the things we do wrong, or collectively we're not going to learn as much. So even though I'm meant to be sort of good at this stuff, I still try to share my own screw ups regularly with people. And I share like 1 in 100. It happens a lot. So I don't know if that's a big enough misadventure, but it was in this super safe environment, and there I was contemplating the wisdom of my decisions.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of perspective driven, right? Because you can say to yourself, you're at the base of a sport climb and it's an easy start, et cetera, right? Or you can say you're actually in terrain that is essentially an alpine route, because you're standing on that little ledge with terrain and exposure below you in consequence.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen, Jordy.
Yeah.
Sarah never falls off. Probability is like 99% she's good here.
I've been out short roping my wife, essentially, guiding her, right? And she calls me on it. We're short roping and I'm up on this little ledge and I'm bringing her up, and she's quite lightweight, and the rock is good and it's all fine. And she said, well, what happens if you fall? And I said, well, I'm not going to fall. She's like, well, what happens if you fall? And then it makes me stop and think, really bad stuff, because we're roped together with nothing attaching us to the mountain. Good point.
Yeah, I basically did the same thing. We got lucky, and so. But I think by sharing these stories, and we as professionals, we're sometimes like, well, we're pros at this, like this is what we do, and so we don't want to sometimes honestly admit to our errors. It's like, wow, that guy's pretty embarrassed. Like, how embarrassing would that be to get like helicoptered off the side of the sport climbing area? But if we don't talk about it and we don't open that culture up more, then I think those of us who are the quote pros do need to do a better job of talking about our near misses, and hopefully that open. I've seen some change of that in the last few years in the mountain cultures. People are talking more about their problems, and I've got a good one. I've had a few more since then. That was a little while ago, but these things happen, and if you've done enough things right, I was giving Sarah a spot, and I had thought, okay, if she does just slip, I'll just push her onto the ledge here, and we'll be fine. And it is doing enough things right so that when you screw up, that one thing you did wrong doesn't get you. So put in more gear with your wife. Or you had that rope just tossed around the horn and she pitched and it worked out. Like, you got to do enough things right so that when you screw up, it hopefully doesn't get you. But I've been there too, Matt. I'm with you.
Wow. Thanks for this, Will. This is amazing so far, but we're going to stop right here for this episode so that we can digest some of what's been said so far. Before we break down some of Will's key points, I want to mention that if you want to find out more about Will, you can visit his website at Will Gadd. That's 2 L's and 2 D's, willgadd.com. That's where you can get his contact info, find links to his latest projects, exploits, and filmography, see some of his coaching tips, and to find out how you can hire him to be your guide or speaker. Okay, Chris, when it comes to avoiding a misadventure, what were your takeaways so far?
There are quite a few, actually, but I'm just going to highlight 2. 3. Actually, Will is an amazing speaker, so I think that's pretty obvious to all, but I'm definitely going to highlight that for sure. And sure, the 2 points that came out to me were that it starts early by having good role models. And Will shared his upbringing with his father, who took him to places like Mount Athabasca and those sorts of places early in life. And it does underline how important it is to get good role models and people out there to give you coaching and to show you what it is like to be able to have these experiences and hopefully to have these experiences happen the right way. And so coaching, parents play such a big role, but it's not just limited to parents, having good coaches, instructors, friends, colleagues, and that sort of thing. And so Will was very fortunate to be able to have that, which he highlighted. The other thing he highlighted was how much preparation it takes to pull off some of these high risk endeavors. And I think a lot of people look at what some of these risk taking sports involve and the people that do it at the highest level and think that somehow these athletes just come in and pull it off without any preparation whatsoever. And Will's story about having spent 2 years getting ready to do that 3 hour climb on Niagara Falls really highlights how much preparation goes into getting ready for these types of events. And that preparation is used to think about what can be done to minimize the risk and to look ahead at what would happen if things were to go wrong. Jordy, what stuck out to you?
Well, Will talked about the positive power of negative thinking, and so I'll just elaborate on that a little bit. And that's basically, fast forwarding to the bad thing happens as you are doing the activity, whatever that is, whether it's surfing, climbing, biking, skiing, scuba diving. And so if you actively move ahead in your thought process because you're hopefully not going to have the bad thing happen, but as part of your preparation, like you were just talking about, fast forward to that's happened. And now go back to where you are currently in your preparation and say, have I prepared enough? Am I ready for this? Am I physically ready for this? Do I have the equipment I need? Have I told people that I'm going to do this stuff? And now something's gone wrong and they have no idea that something's gone wrong for me and I can't call for help. So the positive power of negative thinking is really a good way to look at it. Then the other part was that he spoke about was listening to your fear, right? And we're kidding ourselves if we all say we don't have any fears. Everybody does. And often it's that people who seem to be the least fearful, the reason why they appear to be the least fearful is because they actually are afraid all the time of stuff and concerned about it. But you can use that positively too. So Will noted that when he feels afraid, it's often because he feels like he's missing something or might not know he's missing something, but he just feels afraid. And it's normal for somebody to be stressed. A guest, for example, a client of yours, somebody on a course, but the guide really should try not to operate in a stressed zone. If you are stressed, you probably should do a little bit more planning, preparation, like we've already talked about here. If you're stressed, you might be on the edge of your risk comfort level, and think about your guest. If you feel like what you're doing as an experienced professional is risky, or a high-end recreationalist, if you feel it's risky, the other people around you, they might have no awareness of how risky it is, but they are definitely at risk at that point. So really try and think why you are feeling stressed and do everything you can to try and alleviate that. And that might mean turning around. It might mean dialing back your activity. It might mean having a discussion about it as a group and trying to figure out, is this perceived risk or is this real risk, or is this perceived fear or real fear?
Now, let's turn it over to you, the listener. What were your takeaways? You can share your thoughts, stories, or insights with us via our social media feeds or by emailing us. You can find our contact information at deliveringadventure.com. We've also posted our contact information in the show notes, as well as links to Will Gadd's website. Well, that's it for this episode. You can hear more of our conversation with Will in our next episode. Before you go, though, please don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast through your favorite streaming service, and if you can, please share this with your like-minded friends. If you found it entertaining, they probably will too. Besides, we need your help to grow this podcast's audience so that Jordy and I can keep this going. Thanks for listening. Your time is important, and we really appreciate it.